Hello everyone, this is Seth, and today we're going to be looking at an evolution simulator. This specific simulator is called the Life Engine, and as you should be able to see, it's quite low quality in terms of graphics, but it's pretty awesome when you understand how it's operating evolutionarily. So let's get into it. So, as you can see, there is kind of a black background to this engine, which is just the empty space that it's simulating. And you can see probably a lot of gray lines and circles. Those are manually handcrafted or hand-drawn walls. So each color has a symbolic representation in this simulator. And the purpose of the walls is to section off 4 different territories of evolution. When it comes to evolution, this is the principle of geographic isolation. When creatures are geographically isolated, they can evolve in divergent pathways because they only reproduce with their group, and if they're isolated, then they can get some mutations that guide them down a different path than people in other geographic areas. Alright, so to begin with, let's see if I can introduce you to some of the stuff here. We should go into colors first. So in the Life Engine, there are 8 different colors of the different pixels that are used. The orange pixel is a mouth organ. So different creatures, they can randomly evolve different pixels, and depending on which pixel they evolve, they get different functions. So if they evolve an orange pixel, then they have a pixel with which they can eat up food. Let's just skip over here to this blue one. This blue pixel is the food. So food can randomly appear on the map. As you can see up here, there's an isolated section of territory that is spawning blue pixels of food, but because of this gray wall, no one is able to eat and consume this food. But over all the food, all this blue food that's spawning elsewhere, creatures are able to pick it up as they travel. So orange is the most necessary so that they can eat. Alright, so the next color is this green color. It's pretty simple. It's a producer. So you can think of this green color as like a plant-like quality, right? It produces food as an output. So you could think of it like a green plant that is producing a blue flower, which is edible. So yeah, if the creature has this green cell or green pixel attached to its body, it will produce the blue food in the area around it, randomly of course. Then there's this light blue cell, which is a mover cell. So you could think of this light blue pixel as like the engine of the creature. So as long as they have one of these blue cells, they've got an engine to move around. And then we've got the red magenta cell. This pixel is a kill cell. So it will deal damage to anything that it touches. And the interesting thing about this Life Engine simulation is that each creature has like HP hit points, right? If it's a 3-pixel creature, it has 3 hit points. And so what that means is that a kill cell must come into contact with the creature 3 times in order to deal 3 points of damage in order to kill it. But a larger creature is going to have more pixels, which means it's going to have more hit points, which means it's going to need more collisions with a kill cell in order to deal enough damage to actually kill it. So that's a relevant factor to consider as these things evolve. And then we have this dark purplish colored pixel. This purple cell, it represents armor. So if they evolve to incorporate a piece of armor into their body, that means that this pixel is resilient and will negate and ignore damage from kill cells. So if the creature has some armor on it, it can bump into these kill cells and it won't take any damage. So that's kind of useful at making them a little bit more resilient. And then over here we have a light gray color. This light gray color is an eye. It's an eyeball, a sensory unit. And the interesting thing about these eyeballs is that they are directional. They are specific to one direction, north, south, east, or west. At least from the perspective of the creature. As the creature rotates, the eye will rotate with it. So an eastward facing eyeball, as it rotates, it can rotate to north, south, or west as needed for visual purposes. But the creatures can evolve logic behind their eyeballs. So they can evolve to, if they see food, to move towards it. And they can evolve to, if they see a kill cell, to run away from it. So they've got a little logic behind these eyes that they can evolve. They can evolve aggressive brain logic with their eyes, where they hunt things down, or they can evolve like prey-like behavior, which is very skittish, and they run from the sight of anything with their eyeball. All right, well, that was a pretty good summary of the colors. Hopefully that makes that a little bit more clear. In this editor, we can create our own creatures. That's not super relevant now. World controls, these are different settings. So there's a lot of things you can play with here, but that's not the point of why we're showing this here today. Today we want to look at the different environments that these creatures evolved in, and look how they stabilized on certain phenotypic expressions in each environment. So this has already been running for a couple hours, and if you look over in this bottom left quadrant, it's kind of a maze-like structure, and it's relatively similar and equivalent in the width of these maze structures, and they've figured out a certain shape. I don't know. There's this. They kind of look like a little toothpick shape here. And after running the simulation for a couple hours, they seem to think that this toothpick shape makes them the most efficient in this maze-like environment. Now let's move up to this upper left quadrant, and you can see over here, it might be hard to see, but there's a lot of gray dots. There's just randomly dispersed blocks of wall, right? These gray little blocks dispersed everywhere, these are walls. And so they've got a lot more freedom in this environment. It's not maze-like, but there are little obstacles every here and there, and that just kind of makes it a little bit annoying for them in their desire to explore. And so they've evolved this kind of, I don't know what you would describe that. It's kind of like a triangle, kind of like a race car shape to them. And they can kind of spin around with this triangular shape. It makes them pretty agile at kind of spinning around these obstacles. So these obstacles don't really stop them very much because their shape is pretty flexible for getting around it. But because it's a more open terrain, they've been able to evolve a larger structure than these little toothpick creatures, because less restrictions gives them more freedom to grow in size. All right, let's move over to this upper right quadrant, this upper left corner. This environment is unique among the four environments in that there are no obstacles. And you can see this is a pretty dense environment, and they're actually quite big in size. And so as they have a little bit more freedom, size becomes a little bit more beneficial because they don't need the agility to move around obstacles. Now, let's try to zoom in to see if we can understand what type of evolution has gone on over in this free environment. So let's pause this, and let's open up the editor, and we can click on individual creatures to see what they look like. And in this little box, it's showing the basic structure of the creatures, and it looks like these creatures are rather homogeneous, as in they're pretty consistent in having the same structure, which means that this structure seems to be the most stable structure in this environment, at least at this time. And so we can see that they've got two eyeballs. They've got one eyeball going to the left, one eyeball going to the right, kind of like a goat. It's this structure signifies like a prey animal, because you want to see if there's threats to your left or your right while you're grazing for food. And their kill structure is right in front of them, which is similar to a goat. It's got its horns in the front of its head, so it's looking left and right, and it's got the horns ready to go if it's got a threat. But interestingly enough, it's got mouths on its rear end. It's got a mouth on its left buttocks and a mouth on its right buttocks, basically. And it's got two producer units. These green units allow it to produce food, so it's quite an interesting little creature. It's creating it's creating a trail of food that it leaves behind as it moves around, but then it can use its mouths to eat the food that it's producing. And it's always looking for danger, and we can see how the brain has evolved over here in this bottom right corner. If it sees food or armor, it moves towards it. And if it sees a mouth, or producer, which is a green cell, or a killer, it runs away. So these producers, since all of these guys are very similar, when it's running away from a mouth, a producer, or a killer, that means if it sees the buttocks of a neighbor, it's going to run away. And if it sees the head of a neighbor, it's going to run away. So it's basically running away from anything that seems like an enemy creature, and it only goes towards the food, basically. And the armor, this is an interesting innovation. It'll move towards the armor because I guess it's not afraid of that. So if it ever sees armor, perhaps there might be food next to some armor, and so by allowing yourself to get close to the armor, you're perhaps opening yourself up to a little bit extra food. So that's interesting. All right, now to introduce this last quadrant over here in the bottom right. As you can see that there is only one obstacle here, and it's just one little wall. It's got a gap on the right, a gap on the left, so it's very minor obstruction to their environment, and they've evolved a slightly bigger shape than these little toothpick guys over here. These guys look kind of like pizza slices, so we've got little pizza slices floating around, and they're just moving around kind of in circles in random behavior around here. Let's zoom in, let's pause this and see if we can figure out what strategy they're operating under. Let's click on that one. So this is a random selection. In the very center here, we can see their eyeballs. So towards the tip, in the middle of this pizza slice, they've got one eyeball going forwards, one eyeball going backwards, giving them like, 360-degree vision a little bit. And they've got a producer on the front of the pizza, and they've got a producer on the back of the pizza, allowing them to make food in the forward and backwards directions. They've got a kill unit on the tip of the pizza slice. So they're kind of like a shark or something with like a dangerous mouth at the top. So as they travel, this mouth can probably poke and deal damage, and so that's probably a useful place to put the kill unit, in a place where it can have the most reach. And at the back of this, we've got two mouths, and so I guess its structure is fat enough to where, as it rotates, these two mouths are going to bump into lots of food. You could think of this as like this pizza slice. It rotates into the shape of a pizza, and as it rotates, this crust is able to bump into a large area of food and absorb it all. So that seems like a pretty good design. And in the very back here, there's just the little movement cell that gives it the energy to move around. So a cute little design, and they seem to be operating pretty well. All right. So the last piece that hasn't been explained are these little bubbles. There's a bubble here with a bunch of creatures inside of it. These creatures were specifically designed by me. I was just kind of curious, seeing if I could create a sustainable creature for these really tight environments. As you can see, most of these circles, they went extinct. So my creature failed in 3 of these environments. But given how tight this area is, this creature somehow evolved to survive in such a tight area. So let's pause this and see if we can figure out why they are doing so well. So they've got some armor. If you can see, there's 3 purple pixels giving them a little armor. They've got a green producer cell, which is helping them make food. They've got 3 eyeballs. They are very visual. They can see up, down, and they can see to their left. And here is their motion pixels. They've got 2 motion pixels, which is not super relevant. My understanding is 1 motion pixel is enough for movement. 2 doesn't do anything additionally. And they've got a little mouth up here. So I am not sure why these guys evolved this way. Let's see if there's any more varieties in here. That looks... oh, it's got 3 motion. It traded an armor for a motion on one of them. And that's got a producer. So they seem to just have evolved this eyeball strategy, which is interesting. But hey, it's working for them. I don't know why. That's how evolution works. Whatever can survive will survive, and that's all there is to that. All right, so here comes the fun part. Now that we've introduced all the creatures, what we want to do is we want to pit them against each other. We want to see how if a creature from one environment is introduced to another environment, can they colonize it? Can they conquer it? Will they be able to survive in a new environment? It's possible that each of these creatures is most adapted for their own personal environment, so they might try to invade each other, but they might fail. There might be kind of a stalemate, right? And it's hard to tell, but we can make our best guesses, right? So what could happen is these little toothpicks in the bottom left corner. These toothpicks, they seem adapted to this maze-like structure. If we introduce them over here, they might not be as well adapted for this more free-floating environment, because their small structure makes them very agile for this tight environment. If they're exposed to this spacious environment, they might be weaker. Their smaller size means they have less HP points. They might die easier. And so these triangles, they might be able to defend their turf and keep them out, right? These tougher, larger pizzas, they might be able to kick these toothpicks out of their territory. But if these pizza slices try to invade the maze, they're not structured to be agile in this new environment. So it might be that each creature is able to defend their territory and successfully repel invaders. But the other hypothesis is that one of these creatures is actually stronger than the other and will successfully eradicate the other. This is the unfortunate nature of evolution. Evolution isn't pretty. Evolution is destructive and violent. And, extinction is basically genocide at the species level. And it happens more than we'd like it to. But understanding it might be useful to us. So let's see what we can do here. All right. So down here is our little control panel with the little buttons over here. There's a certain button over here that allows us to play with the walls. So we can left click to add wall structure, and we can right click to remove it. So I think I'm going to open a little passageway down here and see if we can get some interaction. Now I only opened a very tight structure, just enough for one of them to get through. And as you can see here, one of these little toothpicks is edging his way in, but they're kind of struggling back and forth. Okay, so we've got 3-4 pizzas that have invaded. These pizzas slices seem to be doing a better job in this little invasion. Now they're kind of stuck. Do you see these pizza slices? They're just vibrating back and forth. These pizza slices are not adapted for this environment, and they are struggling. They are absolutely stuck here, and now we've got our first casualty, starved to death. So more of these pizza slices are trying to come in, but they are having a hard time with this. And these little toothpicks, they're just successfully maintaining their environment. So that's quite interesting. Let's see if we can buff up. Oh, we're at max speed right now. So maybe we'll just run this for a while and see what happens. All right, after running this for just a little bit, just a few minutes, they're starting to get a little bit more pizza invasion. Down here in the third layer, we've got 1, 2, 3. 3 pizzas have snuck their way back here. But it seems like they're still struggling. See, you can see this pizza, he keeps getting stuck. And these little guys, they're more numerous, and they can kind of deal damage, right? With their little stinger, they can poke these pizza guys and slowly kill them, as there's a couple pizza casualties down here. And here's a long chain of pizzas they're trying to invade. But they're not having a very successful invasion. As far as I can tell, this was as far as they've gotten in the first 5 minutes. Up to this third layer, and maybe a little bit further down here. Alright, after running this for another couple minutes, we can see that these little pizza creatures, they have successfully infiltrated this maze structure. Somehow they were able to get through and completely dominate. As far as I can see, the little toothpick creature has been completely eradicated. So, that is that. Now, I think, if I'm seeing this correctly, I think these little, in the upper left quadrant, I think some of these creatures have evolved a little bit. They look a little different, more hook-like. I don't remember them looking so hook-like before, but as we can see in the structure, they've got 3 mouths, and they've got 2 kill units. So their spinning motion allows them to kind of hook people. There's an S shape to this, where they can deal damage, and they can just keep spinning and just deal lots of damage as they spin. That's kind of an interesting evolution. And I guess as they hit these obstacles, they spin around the obstacles and they kill as they go. So our next experiment is going to pit these S-shaped hook creatures against these kind of plant-like creatures. There's a lot of green production over here. And the environment difference is not that substantial. There's basically no obstacles over here and just a bunch of blocks, scattered blocks over here. So let's turn this on and get rid of the wall and see what happens. So I created a little bit more space there than is probably needed, but that will give us a quick intro into how they're invading each other. These green creatures, these plant blobs, they're invading in quite rapid pace over here. There's a lot of green creatures moving west. And these hook-like creatures have not been able to invade over here in the upper right yet. At least I can't tell if they have. And yeah, these green plant creatures they're moving in fast. And these hook creatures are they're off to this left third of their environment. They're getting encroached on quite severely. I'm quite surprised that these green creatures are doing so well. I think we need to click on one of them and see what exactly about these creatures is making them so successful. They've got producer units and eyeballs and the kill unit, and they're moving towards food and armor, and they're moving away from mouth producers, killers, and eyes. There's not a lot to go off there. It's not quite clear why they're so successful, but within less than a minute, they've completely dominated this new terrain. So that's quite fascinating. And there's also there seems to be a new evolution here. There's kind of one of these plant creatures evolved 2 kill units, and that's seems like a new adaptation for the new environment. They're getting extra aggressive, perhaps. But as far as I can tell, these green plant creatures have successfully dominated this new environment. All right, for this next piece, we will be opening up. I'm wondering how we should do this. Should we open it up over here? Should we open it up in the center? Or should we open it up over here? Questions. Well, it's possible that these creatures are slightly more evolved since they had to fight into this new territory. These creatures are more original, so maybe we'll do both sides. These guys are more evolved. Maybe we'll just cut open a little hole over here, and we'll cut open a hole over here. And we'll see if there's any difference between these right and left sides as to who is able to dominate in the new environment. So these the plant creatures, were invading, but look like they're getting killed pretty well by these pizzas. Over here on the right-hand side, it seems like these plant creatures are very aggressive and moving into new terrain. But they're getting pushed back pretty fiercely. They are not making a ton of progress. They're just stuck on this most right-hand edge, and they're getting killed off by these pizza guys. And back over here on the left, there are a lot of plant creatures coming down this line, but they are suppressed and slowly dying off. So it's not clear that the plant creatures will be successful in this this bottom environment is tighter. And it's not clear that these larger plant creatures will be successful in this tighter terrain below. So as we can see on this left-hand side, the plant creatures are invading in greater forces. They've breached the second layer. So they're all over these 2 layers of the maze. And that's not a good sign, because we remember when the pizzas were invading the toothpicks, they were able to breach the first layer, the second layer, the third layer, and then it was complete destruction. So the fact that these larger blob plant creatures are able to invade 2 layers deep, it makes me kind of confident that it's just a matter of time before they invade the entire maze. And if they can invade this maze is the most tough terrain for them. If they can dominate this maze, they should be able to dominate this bottom right quadrant, which is even more open. But the interesting thing is they're having a harder time over here on this right side than they are on this left side. They're pushing deep into this top layer, and they're pushing deep into this third layer. They're flirting with the fourth layer. One of them is bouncing in between layer 3 and 4 of this maze. But over here, they're very suppressed. Okay, well, actually, we're getting a lot of plant creature movement. They've got about 40% or 50% progress in this area. So the way it's looking is that the plant creatures are going to dominate the entire map. So we'll give it a couple more minutes and see what they're able to do. All right, it's been about a minute, and these plant creatures are pushing deep. They are 80% infiltrated or more on the bottom right corner, and they're 70% infiltrated on this bottom left corner. And a little bit, they've moved all the way down to this most deep layer, so they're all over the pizza terrain. And there's scattered pizza creatures just holding the line, trying to keep alive, but they're getting invaded on every side, and they're struggling, and they are slowly being wiped out on both corners. And so it looks like we are having our next extinction event as these geologically isolated areas. When the environment changes, sometimes geologically isolated areas get opened and connected. You're probably familiar with the idea of land bridges. Based on the levels of the ocean or the movement of the Earth, different islands go up and down with volcanic activity, and different pieces of land and continents can get connected or disconnected at different times, and that makes a big deal for evolution. For example, Australia is an isolated continent, and they've got the most weird mammals in Australia. The platypus. I mean, come on. Australia, by being so isolated for so long, their creatures completely evolved in weird directions, like the kangaroo, who's got a pouch and whatnot. So I think it's safe to say at this point that the pizza creature has been fully eradicated. And I don't know if you've noticed, but my little species of armored creatures in this little bubble, they've gone extinct as well. So... all right, so that was interesting enough, but let's zoom in on these creatures to see if there's anything we can learn about why they were so successful. So let's just select let's pause this. Let's select a random plant creature, and let's look at his features. It looks very similar to the one we looked at the beginning in this quadrant. It's got the goat structure, or it's got the 2 eyes looking left and right. It's got the kill horns, you could say. It's got the producer unit. It's producing food out of its rear, and it's eating the food with its tail, its mouths, 2 mouths on its tails. Let's see if there's any variety here. That looks the same. Same. Huh. It seems to be that this is a very consistent strategy, which maybe is why it's so successful, is because they've honed in on the right design, and there's not a ton of diversity. And this design, for one reason or another, is just super successful in all 4 environments. And the interesting thing is, this creature, it evolved in the most free and unrestricted environment. You'd think that a creature with more obstacles, you'd think it evolved to be stronger. It's kind of like the more difficult your trials, you have to evolve to be extra strong to deal with such a harsh environment. You'd think that these harsh environment creatures would be a little bit more resilient, but for some reason this free terrain evolution was the most successful. And I am somewhat inclined to believe that the reason for that is the fundamental structure of the physics of this game, or should I say the hit points. I think this life engine simulation, I think there's a little bit of a heavy bias towards size, because size gives you life points, your HP. So with greater size, you're harder to kill, you're more resilient, you're stronger, and so I think because they evolved in this more free environment, they were able to evolve to be larger. And because they evolved to be larger, they were able to conquer. And so maybe their size wasn't ideal for these other environments, but when push came to shove, these guys were able to keep reproducing, right? This quadrant was an engine for their population. And so maybe these creatures weren't the best for these environments in isolation, but when they can reproduce and then invade, that having this quadrant as the fuel to do their invasions, I think their size was just too overwhelming and they just pushed their way through. All right, so that was a pretty cool little experiment, and there was a couple lessons to learn and take away from that. There's one last thing I want to try before we end, and I want to restart the entire simulation, and instead of having them compete one by one, I want to open up the center here and see what happens when all 4 species have to compete at this center location, just to see if there's any differences in the style of competition when it's a 4 versus 4 battle royale. All right, so down here in the control panel, we've got world controls. We've got the ability to load a prior state of the world. I've already saved the prior state, so we're in a good place to load up what happened at the beginning. We're back we've got our pizzas in the bottom right corner. We've got our toothpicks in the bottom left. We've got our little S-hook creatures over here in the top left. And we've got our plant blobs over here in the top right. So let's get this running. And let's click over here to our wall button. And I think we want to open up this centerpiece. And almost immediately, we've got our plant creatures plunging over into new terrain. So this will be interesting to see. Let's see which ones survive. And while we're at it, we can open the path for these little armor creatures to pop out of their bubble. They can join the fray if they want. Let's clear this up a bit. All right, so these plant creatures, they are just so aggressive. I don't know why they're so aggressive. There's a little toothpick that got his way up here. That's kind of cute. And these hooks are still hooking, and we've got plants that have infiltrated about 30% of this top left quadrant. Ooh, the plants are just completely eradicating the creatures, the armor creatures in this bubble. Man, I do not know how they are so successful. And these plant creatures, they are coming strong into this maze entrance. And the plant creatures have not infiltrated the pizza area yet. That's kind of interesting. They have plants, they're struggling at the entrance here. I'm wondering if these triangle-shaped pizzas will be able to kind of like point their stingers towards this narrow entrance, and maybe they can hold the line and keep out the invaders. But as we see over here, the plants are infiltrating this first layer of the maze, and they've infiltrated 70, 80, 90% of the top left quadrant. They're just taking over. Their design is just too strong. These little toothpicks, they're kind of cute over here. They're just rotating, doing their thing. They don't realize they're about to go extinct. Their invaders are at the door, coming in strong. And pizzas are holding the line. Now, we do remember from last time, it took these plant creatures a long time to successfully dominate the pizzas. So this might be the hardest one for them. We'll see. All right, about 2 or 3 minutes later, the plant creatures have invaded. Well, they've invaded 3 layers deep on the front end, or 4 layers deep on the front end of the maze, and they've snuck around to this back layer too. So they're kind of attacking these little toothpicks from both sides, and it looks like the toothpicks are about eradicated. There's just a few of them lingering, 2 of them here, and it looks like they're getting wiped out. It's quite unfortunate. They were quite cute little creatures, and 1, 2, 3, 4, they're just getting overpowered. But as we can see on this right-hand side, they've made almost no progress on the pizzas. All right, very notably, we have plant creatures are kind of sneaking in. They're slowly filtering in, and they're kind of just winding their way through this open space. But they're kind of dying. They're getting a little bit, they're getting about, 50% deep before they die. Here's a couple of them. So that's not a good sign for the pizzas. If these plant creatures are getting 50% deep, these pizzas are going to have to mutate. They've got some bad, they've got some not very useful mutations in the bottom right corner. They need to mutate in a beneficial way, fast. If they don't mutate in a good way, they're going to go extinct, just like we saw. And these plant creatures, they're just pushing in. They were so relentless. So you can hold the line here, but because they're reproducing, it's just the force of invasion is nonstop. These pizzas, they couldn't defend forever. Eventually, just by brute force, they were able to break through, and now they've got control over this entrance. They've got complete control over this entrance, and they're slowly pushing these pizzas back into a corner. So, a couple minutes later, and we're still at the same result. These pizzas are being very successful at blocking invasion, and we've got a really weird little mutation down here in the bottom right corner. It looks like some of these pizzas, they've evolved to not move. They've evolved, they lost their motor engine, but it looks like these immobile pizzas are getting eat up by the other pizzas. So it looks like that failed mutation. Oh, you see there's two pizzas over here that they lost their ability to move. There's another one. But it looks like bad mutations is not a successful strategy because they're just slowly, oh, well, they're reproducing. These immobile pizzas are reproducing. They're reproducing faster than they're getting eaten, so that's interesting. All right, I think we have a new mutation. Let's pause this. If I'm seeing this correctly. This guy right here. Oh, that's just the goat creature. So this plant creature, he's mutated. He's mutated to be smaller. Usually the goats, they have an extra mouth at the bottom. This looks like a mutation to be smaller and more agile. So I think that what's happening is because these plant creatures, they're getting funneled into this tighter environment, there's selective pressure to be more agile. And so one or a few of these little plant creatures, they've dropped a mouth to be more useful in this invasion effort. So a couple minutes later, and these pizzas are really struggling. There's plant creatures all around them, and there's just a couple pizzas intermingled, trying to survive, trying to maintain their population, but they are getting outnumbered rapidly. And it looks like they're on path to extinction. All right, after giving this a couple more minutes, it's quite interesting that a pizza has adapted. There's a couple of new evolutions here. The pizzas are almost gone, but there's a new plant adaptation and a new pizza adaptation. And I think we might have just seen okay, we'll pause. Okay, first of all, here is the new plant adaptation. So the plant has evolved to be much more lethal, as you can see in this. It's replaced one of its eyeballs for a kill unit. And now it's got 3 kill units, and so now this plant creature is way more lethal, at least this evolution of it. Now, if we look here, we've got, where did it go? This guy right here, the pizza, he's got 2 kill units, so this pizza is starting to evolve to be bigger. Remember how we said size was really important? Well, these pizzas, they needed to adapt fast, and it looks like they've evolved to get larger. And that allows them to be stronger and to survive, be more resilient. I'm not sure how long this species will be able to survive, but he looks a lot stronger for purposes of dealing with these plant creatures. He's got 2 kill units, he's got 2 eyes, he's got 3 mouths. So the 3 mouths means he can consume fast, and the more he consumes, the faster he reproduces. So this doesn't look like a bad design for competing with these plant creatures. I think our evolved pizza just died. Huh. As far as I can tell, the pizzas are fully extinct, so that is sad. All right, and as we close, I'm just going to be playing one more simulation in the background. And what we're going to do here, we reloaded this. We're going to go into the controls. We're back at the beginning with 4 species. I'm going to change the mutation rate. I'm not sure what the maximum is. that's probably the maximum. So we'll give them the maximum mutation. And we'll do the same experiment and just see if giving them a maximum mutation rate does anything different. And we'll keep this really narrow, so as to make it a little bit harder for the plant creatures. So from a philosophy perspective, what does all of this mean to us? Evolution is a very complex topic. It requires a lot of metacognition, thinking at a higher level, right? There's multiple layers of reality. And whenever you're stuck on one layer of reality, you get boxed in and you become inaccurate. And it's hard to see what's going on when you're only at one layer of analysis. One of the new perspectives on understanding evolution is to think of evolution in terms of multi-layered selection. Right? And multi-layer selection, it means that there's selection forces operating at multiple different levels. So, for example, for the purposes of this simulation, one layer of selection might be how useful is the mouth. Another layer of selection, how useful is the kill cell, right? How useful is size? How useful is movement? How useful is hunting? How useful is retreating? There's different strategies, and all of these different factors are being aggregated and they compound upon each other. If a combination of things is extra useful together, then they succeed and they eat and they reproduce and they push obstacles out of the way, or they get around obstacles. And so thinking about it in multiple layers is super important. So one of the most useful things to remember in evolution is just the fundamental principle: that which can reproduce will reproduce. That which can exist will exist, right? There's no intentionality behind evolution. We often talk about evolution as if it has a mind. That's just for convenience purposes. It seems like it has a mind sometimes because the structure of the universe gives it a purpose. The structure of the environment gives it a teleology, right? Its goal is to succeed in the environment. Why is that its goal? Well, if you have a goal to succeed in the environment, then you will succeed in the environment, given that you can. And if you don't have the goal to succeed in the environment, then you won't succeed in the environment. So like the goal to succeed has to be built into the structure of the creature in order for it to succeed. If it doesn't have the structure with a goal to succeed, it's going to die. And so as you watch the evolution of these creatures, the goal is built into the structure of reality. No one is telling them, you need to survive. There's no commandments to survive. If you don't survive, you disappear. If you do survive, you remain in existence. And it's just kind of a brute fact of reality. And the interesting thing about this brute fact of reality is we can work backwards from it. So we can say, okay, look at the creatures that exist. Well, what do we know? We know that because those creatures exist, that means that they have the goals within them. They are built, evolutionarily built, to contain the structure of that which they need to succeed. Because the fact that they exist is evidence that they have the capability of succeeding in this environment. So existence is evidence that there is a structure behind that existence that allows it to exist. And so when thinking about things from a human perspective, we can make many observations in reality. We can observe different cultures, different religions, different political systems, right? And the true thing about evolution is that which can exist will exist. That which exists, it only exists because it has the structures within it that allow it to exist. And so you could ask questions like, well, why does this religion exist? Well, within that religion, it has the structures and the goals, the defense mechanisms. It has all the things that it needs to survive and propagate built into its structure, right? Religions, they often have proselyting functions built into them. You could think of these psychological things. They evolve just like physical things, right? So you can evolve different psychological mechanisms to propagate better, right? And so all of the religions, cultures, humanity in general, you can look at observations of humans and you can kind of say, okay, I can kind of understand based on this human's environment, based on this culture, based on the situation, we can kind of understand, oh, the reason they exist in that manner is because they have a structure that allows them to exist in that manner, right? But that doesn't mean that that structure is the only valid structure. When the environment changes, new structures become necessary in order to succeed. And that's kind of, there's kind of this tension between conservatism and progressivism, right? The central argument within our political system is central to the evolutionary argument, which is when do we mutate and when do we stay the same, right? Stasis versus mutation, conservatism versus progress, right? If the environment is shifting, if the environment is changing, we need mutations. If we're getting invaded, we need mutations because we're under threat. The shifting environment is a type of threat. There's war types of threats. All of these type of threats are threats to existence. And if you don't respond to threats to existence, you cease to exist. And so you don't have to defend yourself. You don't have to change. You don't have to adapt. If you don't care about existing, then you can just not adapt, not defend, cease to exist. But if you care about existing, then you need to figure out how to adapt, how to change, how to defend, and do the things that are necessary in order to continue the game of survival, reproduction, propagation, etc. And the thing is, some people say, oh, there's an is-ought gap. You can't bridge it. Just because evolution wants us to survive and reproduce doesn't mean we should. So, fine. You don't have to evolve to survive and reproduce. You don't have to do that. But whoever says that, whoever actually believes that, it's like, okay, that software program like the software program, thinking of the mind like a software program, maybe evolution gave you a software program to not care about existence. That's fine. But what it means is probably, in all likelihood, that software program is going to cease to exist. Now, there might be beneficial aspects to that software program in certain environments. Perhaps in highly dense environments, maybe it's better to not really care about reproduction as much, right? Maybe in low density population environments, it's like, oh, we really need to care about reproduction so we can expand. But if we're already expanded, if we're already dense, maybe it's normal to kind of turn down the knobs and say, hey, we don't need to care about reproduction as much as before because we're everywhere. We've got like responding to the new environment, right? The new environment is a highly dense environment. Perhaps there's evolutionary benefits to winding down some of those evolutionary drives. And then you can have a more stable ecosystem in a highly dense environment. But the fact of the matter is evolutionary pressures are guiding that which exists, no matter what. Unfortunately, that's the case. Evolution, it's not a beautiful, morally, it's not a beautiful system. It's kind of, from an artistic standpoint, it's kind of interesting. You get to see the evolution of creativity. It's kind of beautiful from an artistic standpoint. From a moral standpoint, it's atrocious. It's ugly. It's genocide. It's extinction. It's extermination. It's evolution for the best ability to kill and destroy and sometimes rape. You know, rape is sometimes a strategy in evolution. It's ugly and it's blind to moral implications. And we have evolved moral intuitions. And so we have this unique situation where we've got a prefrontal cortex and we can kind of rebel against our baser desires. We're not as robotic as most creatures. We're robotic in a smarter way. We've got like the dumb animal brain and we've got the smart human brain. In my opinion, both of them are very programmatic, very software oriented. But we can kind of use our smarter brain to offset our dumber animal brain. It means that, hey, this dumb animal brain, it just wants to maximize reproduction. But this smarter brain, we're going to repress that. We're going to put that under some control because the smarter brain, it's looking into the future, right? The dumb brain, it can't see the future. It's just like, oh, survive, eat, reproduce, kill bad guys, repeat. But the smart human brain, we can evaluate and we can look into the future and we can say, based on my smarter human brain, I know that we want to survive, reproduce, and we want well-being, and we want to be consistent because we're a social species. We want to apply well-being to other creatures. So we need to figure out a way to kind of keep our instincts in check in order to maximize our success into the future. And so the unique thing about humans is we kind of have this ability to self-evolve. We can kind of evolve our own brains and we can kind of evolve our own cultures. And this gives us the ability to adapt much faster than is normal for evolutionary creatures. Instead of having to wait for genetic code to evolve, we can kind of reprogram our own brains to evolve. And so that's one of the fascinating things about humans. Compared to all other animals, we have evolved to adapt. We are best at adapting to we can adapt to cold environments, to hot environments, to dense environments, to low population density environments. We use clothing, we use technology. We are so good at adapting. And a lot of that is due to the fact that we were able to evolve bigger brains. And so I guess the moral takeaway is evolution is very important to be mindful of, but it's even more important to be aware of how our humanity makes us better able to take the reins of evolution and perhaps guide us in a better direction than we might go otherwise. So I hope you enjoyed that and have a great day.